Welcome, everybody, to another great episode of New York, California Dynasty Talk. We might be needing to change that name soon, but for now, we're definitely New York, California. Hope everybody's doing a great day out there, especially with this COVID and just, crazy things going on. Football players deciding they're opting out. A lot of them, of course, are the bigger dudes, which, we kind of understood with, they're just not built to withstand this COVID stuff. So what we're going to do today is sort of give you the guys that are being overdrafted and looking over, age and just position where they're in, maybe new coaching, whatever it may have you. We're going to be focusing on those guys for you. So, Ralph, how you doing today, bud?
Trying to survive this blistering New York City heat, but otherwise I am doing just great.
What are you guys at? What temperature are you guys at right now?
We are in the 90s right now. So today I believe the high is going to be around 95, but you also always have to factor in the humidity. And so that makes things just, 2 times worse.
Yeah, humidity. It's like, I think a lot of people forget about, especially when you get into the East Coast area, that there's big humidity going on. And so you say, 90 degrees, but then you factor in probably like 10% humidity, that kind of factor, and then you're up easily close to feeling like it's 100.
Yeah, I'll just put it to you this way. I mean, when it gets really, really bad here, if I just walk my dog for 2 blocks, when I get back, I felt like I just ran a marathon. So that's just, if you can imagine that's how bad it gets here sometimes.
Wow. Yeah. Humidity, no thanks for me. So one of the questions that we're looking at as far as players that we feel aren't deserving, what do you look for as far when you're making your list of these guys? What exactly are you looking for to say, okay, you know what, this guy definitely doesn't fit the bill? What factors do you consider?
Well, one of the factors that I consider, one of the big factors, is upside. I want a player who has that potential to, do better than he did last. Even if he's coming off a really good year, does he have that potential to A, sustain his production, or B, do even better? And so many times it's just a question of, if it's between somebody who is 28 versus another player who's 33, more times than not, I'm probably going to go with the player who's 28. Of course, things can vary from player to player, but, football is just the type of sport that, unless you're a place kicker or quarterback, guys get old fast, especially at the running back position. Once they reach 27 years old, you have to think that they've probably seen their best years in most cases, unless, we're talking about a Curtis Martin, unless we're talking about a Frank Gore, but, those guys are the exceptions.
Yeah, when you see players do it, another one may be Adrian Peterson, that, you people get in their mind, they see 3 or 4 of these guys and they think, okay, well, if they can do it at 33, 34 years old, then that must mean everybody can do it. But they forget that there's only 3 of these guys out of 50 running backs or whatever amount. So then you're looking at what, like 2% chance of a player actually hitting those ages and still being able to perform. And as we've seen, Adrian Peterson, even though he's on a team, he's not performing like he used to. Of course, Frank Gore is just more of a guy that just runs himself into the defensive line and sort of wears that down. And these guys aren't performing. These guys, if you're in a 2 running back, league, they're not going to be making your starting lineup.
Right. And then the other thing I look at is recency bias. I don't want to ever fall into the trap of drafting a player just based on what he did the year prior. There's so many other things you need to look at. I mean, football is such a team sport that, if you're missing your left tackle, if you're missing your tight end, if your star running back, just signed a free agent contract with another team, everything affects everything else. I mean, one piece can affect the whole pie is basically what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
And so, things can change very quickly in the NFL, where a 6-win team can turn into a 12-win team from one year to the next, and vice versa.
And another thing that I kind of look at too is contract years. There's a lot of players that might have a good, might be pretty good, but if their contract years is expiring, like even maybe like a Dalvin Cook, who we might be talking about later, he's at the end of his contract this year, and who knows where he might go to. We don't know if he's going to go to another team that has already a running back established. So when you're trying to figure out 3 or 4 years down the line with these dynasty guys, contract year is important. Do you see it as an importance, or do you see, okay, that's just maybe a minor piece to the pie?
Well, I think it's a factor, and I think different players, they react differently to these contract years. Some guys thrive, and some guys, just melt when the contract years come up. And so I just think that you have to treat players individually, and some guys can perform under pressure and some guys can't. That's just the way it is. And so as far as Dalvin Cook is concerned, I mean, he doesn't have much leverage. So I'm confident that, if he joins the team and if he plays, he's young, strong, and healthy enough to be a solid RB1. But again, I think it just varies from player to player.
Yeah, I think also with Dalvin Cook too is that when you're injured every single year and then your contract is sort of coming to an end, do teams really want to spend a lot of money on you and put you in a favorable position to be their number one back when you've proven throughout the first 3 or 4 years that you've been in the league that you can't stay healthy?
Well, I think he knows that. And I think he knows that he doesn't have a long shelf life. So, the fact that he established himself as, one of the top 5 or 6 running backs in the league, he knows this is not going to last long. And so while the getting's good, he figures, let me maximize my earning value. So that, so you have to understand where he's coming from as well.
Sure.
But, this is a salary cap sport. This is a sport where, dead money really hurts you down the line. And so, Minnesota has to be smart because most running backs are very much replaceable.
Yeah. And as we've seen players come and go, running backs come and go. And we even discussed that a little bit on the rookie running backs on that show. So if you want more information on that, definitely check out our rookie running backs breakdown. Speaking of running backs, we'll switch position to quarterbacks now and look at some of the guys that you have off the top of the list. Let's go with Jared Goff. Now, me personally, I think Jared Goff is someone that is sort of transitioned himself a little bit. He's gone from that Super Bowl year where he threw over 30 touchdowns and the offense looked great and all that kind of thing, and then Sean McVay says, okay, let's shorten it up. Let's run a little bit more. Let's put in a little bit more 12 personnel. And I think that kind of affected him a little bit. He's never been, to me, a great quarterback. He's never been a number one quarterback. What are your thoughts as far as going into this season and the next few years?
Well, right now, Jared Goff, in terms of fantasy, he's being drafted as a mid-tier QB2. And as we know, more and more people are playing with 2 quarterbacks. So, look, I think he's a middle-of-the-road average quarterback. And as I said before, I always look for upside in my players at whatever position I'm drafting at. And I just don't see a ton of upside with Jared Goff. Now, people might look at his yardage numbers and be very much impressed. Now, he threw for, I think, he's had back-to-back seasons with over 4,600 passing yards. But you take a look at his touchdowns, and they tumbled precipitously. I think it was from 32 to 22, and his interceptions are pretty high. And the thing that I look at with Jared Goff is that, when everything is working great, the guys are making their blocks, and the running game is firing on all cylinders, Jared Goff can lead you down the field and he can win you some games. But as soon as something goes wrong, or there's a guy that an opposing defensive lineman who's blitzing and is breathing down his neck, Jared Goff is just not the same quarterback. And so what I'm really looking at with Jared Goff is I wouldn't. There are about probably 4 or 5 players I'd rather have as my QB2 than Jared Goff. He just doesn't have any running ability at all.
No.
I mean, what did he have last year all season? I believe he had 33 rushes for 40 yards. Doing some quick math there, that's like 1.2 yards per carry.
Wow.
And in today's league, you got to be able to scramble at least a bit. You have to have a minimal amount of mobility, and he has none. And so to me, that caps his upside right there. And the fact that he just doesn't handle the blitz very well. It's not somebody I'd truly be excited about. Now I know he's 25 years old, so his future is ahead of him. But I mean, that obscene contract that they gave him, $134 million extension with $110 million guaranteed. I have a feeling the Rams are going to regret that they ever presented him with that contract offer. But for my purposes, there are a bunch of other guys. I mean, I'd rather have Drew Lock. I'd rather have Daniel Jones. I'd rather have one of these guys as my mid-tier QB2 than Jared Goff, just because they're just far more athletic. And I think that, when the pressure's on, I think these players, as they develop, they're going to be able to make better decisions than Jared Goff.
Yeah, and then when you throw in the fact that their offensive line is trash, and you have someone that, I mean, Goff can move around the pocket a little bit. I mean, he's not like a statue back there, but he's not, as you mentioned, he's not going to be taking the ball off and running like, say, Daniel Jones or pretty much any other quarterback that's a statue. But he can move around the pocket. But when they're blitzing and when you don't have protection up front, then you're going to be getting many games like we saw last year when he went, a month and a half without a touchdown, or at least a month without a touchdown. And it's just the way that offensive system is already limiting him. Then you throw in on top of the bad offensive line, no mobility to run. It's disastrous.
I mean, you really have to wonder now if he puts up the same type of season that he did in 2019 in 2020. Do you think the Rams might be considering looking for his replacement? I mean, I know that they're not going to have a first-round pick for a while, but they can always trade for one, or maybe they'll go out and get a veteran free agent if he's available. Or, I mean, here's another possibility. At some point, Aaron Rodgers is going to get traded. It might not be next year. It might be the year after. But, hey, if things don't go well with Goff, maybe they make an early offer for Aaron Rodgers. Who knows?
Yeah, I think it all depends on how much tied they're into that contract. I mean, I know they're smart enough, at least you would hope, to sort of have loopholes in that contract where they don't have to pay him like the full extent of that salary. But if they're on hook with that salary, and then as an organization in their contract, their field, I mean, that organization is in bad shape as far as money goes. They have almost zero kind of money. But if they can get out of that contract, yeah, I could see someone signing, Aaron Rodgers by then is going to be a veteran minimum. So those kind of things, sure, I could definitely see something like that.
Yeah, so I think he's very much under the gun. I would have to think so. I mean, who knows? He's young enough to turn his career around, and maybe the Rams surprise us. But you would have to think the guy's been in the league since 2016. As young as he is, he's going to have to step up at some point.
Yeah, I don't see him being any better than what he was that Super Bowl year, 2018, 17. I can't remember exactly what, but yeah, it's all downhill. I think what we saw last year is pretty much what we're going to see out of him You might see a little bit higher, might see a little bit lower, but that's the range. And yeah, I definitely, if he would be one of those where if they fail, and you get a really good return on investment, then I go for it. But as you mentioned, there's so many more exciting guys out there. Those are the guys I'd be targeting. Those are the guys that have more ceiling room than Jared Goff does.
100%.
Now, another quarterback you pointed out that obviously has ceiling and floor room at the very minimum of spacing is Drew Brees. Let's break down this guy and what do you see out of him?
Well, I'm going to bring up upside again, and I know that Drew Brees had a stretch there when he came back from his injury where he was putting up numbers, he wasn't turning the ball over, but then he showed his warts during the playoffs where that weak arm just came back to haunt the Saints, and so. If you're and he's still being drafted as a top 10 quarterback, and so I just think that I personally wouldn't feel comfortable taking him as my number one quarterback. Now, if I compare him with somebody, where I can mix and match, that's a different story. But if I'm taking somebody in the top 10, top 9, that's the type of quarterback that I want to be able to start with confidence each and every week. And so with Drew Brees, that arm of his, I think last year he only attempted he only had about 7 attempts that went for over 20 yards. And we already saw Taysom Hill being inserted into the lineup more and more, when it became obvious where they needed to throw the ball downfield. And so the fact that they don't trust Drew Brees, to throw a 40-yard pass, that speaks volumes to me. And so, to Drew Brees' credit, he's come to terms with that. He's got no issue with, him coming out of the lineup every now and then. But I could see that happening with more and more frequency. So, if you're expecting the same Drew Brees from 5 or 6 years ago, where he was consistently throwing over 4,500 yards and 35 to 40 touchdowns, those days are over. And so I just would rather have somebody with more upside, somebody like a Carson Wentz. I know he gets hurt a lot, so he's not perfect either, but I'd rather have a Carson Wentz. I'd probably even rather have Dak Prescott, that gives me a little bit more upside than a guy like Drew Brees.
Now, if you have say the 12th pick, 12th quarterbacks are off the board, you're at 13th and you need a quarterback, would you go with Drew Brees, or would you wait, say, to after 27 quarterbacks have gone off the board and draft Jameis Winston?
That's a good question. No, I can't go for Jameis. I just don't know what's going on there between Taysom Hill and Jameis. I mean, I want to see a little bit more before I make that type of call.
So you're pretty much avoiding all of the Saints quarterbacks completely. You think that neither one of them would be good for dynasty value?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, they're not paying Winston a whole heck of a lot of money. He's only making $1.1 million on a 1-year deal. And so if he doesn't show them anything, they can very easily just part ways with him. And, as far as Taysom Hill goes, I mean, yeah, I mean, he could be that slash player, but, going into next season, they might just decide just to draft a new quarterback and just start from start all over again. So I don't know what's going on with Winston. I don't trust him. I don't think that, I mean, heck, he's played under a couple of different coaches already. Bruce Arians couldn't seem to straighten him out. And I just don't have much faith in him, really progressing beyond, the level that he's or the production he's already showed over the past couple of years.
Gotcha. Now, would there be a point that you would draft either one of these guys? Or, I mean, I don't want to jump the gun on you and say, okay, you don't like either one of them, So I'm sort of backtracking and saying, okay, would there be a point where you would draft one of these guys?
Okay, well, let's say I'm in an auction league, and if I can get Jameis Winston for $1, yeah, I would make that type of investment. Same thing with Taysom Hill. If I can grab him for $1 or $2, then yeah, I would pick him up if I had space on my roster. But I wouldn't go out of my way to add either one of those guys.
Gotcha. So let's move to the running backs, and very intriguingly, Derrick Henry, 26 years old, 12th running back right now as far as where he's going. Titans last year were 10th in the points, 10th in attempts, and 3rd in yards, and 2nd in touchdowns. So Derrick Henry basically by himself was 2nd in touchdowns. What do you see as far as him, and why are you not really happy about him?
Well, Derrick Henry is very much in his prime, only 26 years old, coming off a spectacular season, over 1,500 yards. The thing that worries me about Derrick Henry in relation to where he's being drafted, so he's being taken, 4th, 5th, 6th overall in the first round. And that is a little too risky for me, just because, I was listening to Mike Lombardi on his podcast last week, and he brought up a stat, which really made me think. Basically, what he said was, with running backs in the NFL, running backs who have had 400 plus touches the previous year, then the following year, 29 of those 31 running backs had disastrous campaigns.
Yeah.
And so I went back and I started thinking about, some of those running backs that had that insane workload. And one of the guys that popped into my head was Larry Johnson, way back in 2006, the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, he led the league with over 1,700 rushing yards, and, combined regular season and postseason, he had 475 touches.
Jeez.
What did he do the next year? I mean, what did he do? He played 8 games, had a little bit over 500 yards, and then what did he do for the rest of his career? Never came close to sniffing 1,000 yards. So I'm not saying that's going to happen to Derrick Henry, but for him to sustain what he did last year, or to do even better than that, I think seems a little bit unrealistic. Also because we're talking about somebody who's not exactly Barry Sanders. We're talking about a guy who's a tank, 6'3", 250 pounds. He runs into people. He drags them down the field. And I don't care how big and strong you are, that's going to take a toll on you at some point. And so is he a solid bet to play 15 or 16 games next year? I don't know about that. I mean, to me, it's a little risky. If I could take him, hey, if he falls to me in the 2nd round, no problems. I'll scoop him up. If I can, maybe even late 1st round, but for me to take him in the early to mid 1st round, I want a little bit more security there. I happen to be very risk averse with those picks, 105, 106, 107. And I don't know if I can get with Derrick Henry.
I agree with you. They have a lot of money tied into him, and I the way that offense is running too, they love to use Derrick Henry to sort of run the ball, bash into guys, and then bring the defense, the linebackers and defensive backs, more encroaching towards the line, so that they can have A.J. Brown and Corey Davis run streaks down the field, and then have Ryan Tannehill throw deep. And the way, as you mentioned, he's a battering ram, and having, I think it was 383 carries. And then you throw into the fact that they went to the AFC Championship game. So it wasn't like their season was over in early January. Their season wasn't over until late January, another 3 weeks that he was playing, that he was beaten up. And we saw pretty much, I think, what we're going to see coming like week 4, week 5, was as we saw him against the Kansas City Chiefs. And by that game, by the time they were playing the Chiefs, he had nothing left. He was beaten up, and it's going to be one of those things where, of course, now he has time off, but come week 4, week 5, then we're going to see him starting to break down, I believe.
And add to that the fact that he's basically at 0 in terms of being a pass catcher. I mean, how many receptions is he going to give you over the course of the year? 15? You know?
Right. Yeah. And that sort of speaks to sort of like Jared Goff, where Jared Goff isn't giving you those points because he's not running the ball. Derrick Henry is not giving you the points by catching the ball. And those really make that floor just open up even wider, because you're not getting that safety net of catching passes or running the ball as far as Jared Goff is concerned. And those really hurt running back values. You're pretty much hoping that Derrick Henry is going to score 19 touchdowns again or 15 touchdowns. And I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I agree. Not saying it's impossible. I still think he's a top back, but
right.
For him to replicate what he did the year before, I just don't see it.
Yeah, and I think as we see that happening this year, and then further down the line as he gets older, he's only 26, but still, I think what we saw out of him last year was the best it's ever going to get for him.
Yeah, totally agree.
Now, another guy, he's moved on to a new team, Denver Broncos. He's 27. The Broncos were 28th in overall points last year. As far as a running game is considered, they were 14th in attempts, 20th in yards, and 22nd in touchdowns. That should all improve with Melvin Gordon. But you sort of see him as another one that's overvalued. Let's talk about him.
Yes. So actually, I've been looking at him the past few weeks, and his ADP hasn't really changed. He's being taken late in the second round. And so in most cases, he's either going to be your RB1 or your RB2, depending on what you do in the first round, if you take him where most people are drafting him. And so when you take somebody as your RB1, RB2, this is somebody that you're looking to put in your lineup on a weekly basis. And I don't know what's going to be going on there in Denver, just because, people seem to discount the fact that Philip Lindsay is a pretty damn good running back, and he's not going anywhere.
Right.
And so, this could very much end up being a committee backfield. And when you take a look at Melvin Gordon, I mean, he didn't look all that impressive last year with the Chargers. In fact, he was outperformed by Austin Eckler. And the other thing, in just comparing Lindsay to Melvin Gordon, I mean, Gordon has had his quite a history of injuries over the past few years, hip injuries, knee issues. I harken back to 2016 season when he was coming off a microfracture surgery. So he is just not as explosive as Philip Lindsay. He's not as quick to the hole. Where he is better than Lindsay is as a pass catcher. Now, the other thing is that, people automatically assume that Melvin Gordon, being the bigger player, the bigger athlete, he's going to get all of the goal line carries. Well, Lindsay was actually pretty good at the goal line as well, inside the 10-yard line. So whereas Melvin Gordon is going to get his touches in that area, so is Lindsay. And so at the end of the day, are we so 100% sure that Melvin Gordon is going to put up better numbers than Lindsay? I'm not convinced, So, when I take a look at Lindsay's ADP being taken, I think it's late or the midway point in the 8th round, I'd rather invest in him as my RB3/RB4 rather than, take Gordon as my RB1/RB2.
Yeah, and I agree with you. A lot of people don't look at Lindsay as a touchdown guy because he's sort of lightweight. I mean, he doesn't have very big stature, but he was pretty successful down low. Melvin Gordon, of course, they're going to give more opportunities to, but by any means, I don't see Lindsay becoming invisible when they get down there. I mean, I could see them even using Gordon to sort of create some space for Lindsey, and then using Lindsey's speed to sort of hit those gaps as quickly as possible, because Gordon is being sort of hammering, chipping away down low. Also, Gordon is not the greatest pass catcher. Now, Lindsey and Freeman aren't either, but it's still one of those situations where he's going to get you some receptions, but it doesn't mean that he's going to own this job, because he can do all of it. I think you're going to see Lindsey definitely come alive. He offers a different kind of value than Gordon does. Gordon is, of course, more of the gap runner, where Lindsey's going to go around the end. So this offense has more fluctuality to it than just saying, okay, Gordon, you're our bell cow.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if somebody put a gun to my head and asked me to come up with a prediction, I see them like being I could see their production, their respective stat lines being very similar at the end of the year. And so I really don't see much difference between the two in terms of, the numbers that they're going to give you.
Now, with Freeman, what do you see him as far as, do you see him just being the third back left off the field, one of those guys that, might not even be a healthy scratch, or I should say will be a healthy scratch kind of guy? Or what do you look at as far as this year and beyond with him?
I see Freeman as the handcuff there, so if you have either Gordon or Lindsey or both, and you have room on your roster, I think Freeman is the type of guy that, you just keep him there as a handcuff if anything were to happen. And let's face it, as I mentioned before, Melvin Gordon the third has been around for a while. He's a big back. He runs into bodies. He's had a lot of he's suffered or he's sustained a lot of punishment over the years. So if there are a handful of games where, Gordon can't suit up, Freeman, I think, has proven that he can do the job. So, yeah, I see him as a nice reserve player that if you have, room on your roster, that's at least that he could come in and perform, because he's proven that in the past. Unlike, some other, instead of having like some rookie on your bench, maybe you'd rather have Freeman that a little bit more about, and he's been with the same team now for a few years. So I'd rather have somebody like him, a proven commodity, versus maybe, some seventh round rookie that I don't know much about.
Now, are you surprised that they didn't trade him? Once they brought in Gordon, I was kind of surprised that Freeman wasn't traded. Or do you see some kind of planning that they're doing there?
I just think that, Freeman at this point is just not making a lot of money. And so I think that's why he's still with the team. And they figure, if anything were to happen to Gordon, we have somebody, we have another big back we could plug in. And it's not like we're breaking the bank to keep him on the roster.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, if Gordon goes down, then they're not losing any of the momentum that they've had over the last few years. They're not putting the faith into, as you mentioned, some 5th, 7th round draft choice. They're not, or some broken down free agent or whatever. They go, okay, well, Gordon doesn't. Well, you know what to do for him. And you've been here 3 years. Go do what you need to do, and carry forth. So. Let's sort of now move on to wide receivers. A guy that's really interesting that I was kind of surprised. I thought he was older than this, but he's only 27. And as far as Cleveland Browns, 22nd in overall points, 19th in passing attempts, 22nd in yards, and 19th in touchdowns. And of course, we're talking about Odell Beckham Jr. What do you see as far as him? I think last year he took a lot of rap, not only because that offense was really bad, but because he was dealing with injuries. I guess you think that this is a problem that's going to be carried forth. Why don't we talk about why you feel he's sort of overly drafted?
Well, let's start with the injuries. I mean, he's missed games in 4 of his last 6 seasons, or I should say his 6 NFL seasons. He's missed time in 4 of those 6 seasons. And so he's not the biggest player. He's not the most durable player. And so let's start with that. The other thing that, I know he put up 1,000 yards, but those are some of the quietest 1,000 yards, I have to say.
It was.
That he gained, and so what I look for, though, I mean, in a receiver, if I'm taking him as a 10th, 12th, 15th receiver, I want some consistency. And last year, he just didn't give you much of that. I mean, I believe he had, 7 games where he posted 40 receptions. I'm sorry, 7 games where he posted 4 receptions or fewer and surpassed 60 yards in only one of those 7 games. So to me, I see a lot of volatility there. And then on top of that, now you got a new coach coming in Kevin Stefanski, and he likes to run the ball. I mean, he's got that run first mentality. And, if we can look at what he did last year with the Vikings as a blueprint, the Vikings only averaged, I believe it was 29 pass attempts per game. So now you bring that over to Cleveland. If that remains true now with the Cleveland Browns and the way Stefanski coaches and calls plays, that's not going to leave a lot out there when you consider all the firepower that Cleveland has. I think that Jarvis Landry is the more reliable receiver. And again, going back to consistency, I think he is the more consistent receiver. Now, overall, Odell Beckham is being taken, depending on what website you're looking at, he's being taken as the 12th receiver in fantasy drafts. I mean, in some drafts, he's being taken before Cooper Kupp, Calvin Ridley, Robert Woods. I would much rather have any of those 3 before Odell Beckham Jr. And then we can't base everything off of last year because he is playing with a young quarterback. But, I mean, Mayfield and OBJ just weren't on the same page for much of the season. And are we confident that that's going to just totally change within the course of one season? I don't know. So to me, when you factor in the injuries, you factor in the inconsistency, and now he's going to be playing under a new coach that's going to implementing his own philosophy. I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in OBJ in where he's being drafted because there are better options out there, or I should say more reliable and consistent options out there. Now, the guy is extremely popular. He's got the hair and he's got the one-handed catches, and he's on social media. He's on commercials. He's very visible. He's very vocal. He's into fashion. And a lot of people want to look like OBJ. A lot of kids look up to him, but, don't let that distract you from what's going on the field. And so, Cooper Kupp might not be all that sexy, but I'd rather have him. I'd rather put him in my starting lineup most weeks than Odell Beckham Jr.
Yeah, because at least you're going to get consistency out of Cooper Kupp. I mean, I guess depending on what side of the year it was, to me, I think that Cooper Kupp, Woods are very much more popular. With Beckham, you're going to get maybe like 4 weeks where he'll explode, and for the rest of the season, you're not going to get anything. So with Woods, with Kupp, those guys are definitely going to be more consistent for you. Calvin Ridley, I think, is one of the surprising players this year, where I see sort of Julio Jones taking more of a back seat to Calvin Ridley. So that would be someone, especially in dynasty leagues, as him moving forward to that number 1 role, where Odell Beckham is sort of, I don't even know if he fits in this offense, and where does he fit? I mean, as you mentioned, Stefanski, we know him from the Vikings, and that's the kind of offense he runs. He's made for these kind of offensive backs where you have Chubb and Hunt, and those guys are going to be the focus of this offense. And then you throw in Hooper and Jarvis Landry going to be catching, at least 80 passes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't, and then they're going to want to limit those interceptions from Mayfield, who it was just as bad as Winston throwing interceptions. I think he had over 20. It's just not looking good for someone that is an Odell Beckham kind of wide receiver. I would expect him to be more if he was on a different team. Maybe the Buccaneers, I would have more hope for him as on that team, but for the most part with the Browns, I don't like it.
Well, here's the other thing that you have to factor in. Baker Mayfield, one of the criticisms on him was that, he is a bit of a gunslinger. Right. He likes chucking the ball downfield. Now, in order to rein him in and factoring in what type of coach Stefanski is, you just know that at least at the outset, they're going to try to make Mayfield into that quarterback where he's going to be taking a lot more checkdowns, where he's going to be making a lot more safer passes. And to me, for a big play receiver like Odell Beckham Jr., that doesn't really bode well for him and his playmaking abilities.
Exactly. And again, going back to the Minnesota Vikings offense, who do they have at quarterback was Kirk Cousins. Now, Kirk Cousins is far, far away from what Baker Mayfield is, and they're going to want those short and intermediate routes used more and more heavily, and that doesn't really fit Mayfield or Odell Beckham. Great addition, and what it looked like going into last year with the hype of Mayfield, but as far as now is considered, the sooner Beckham can get out of that offense, I think the better off he's going to be. And right now, I think he's just someone is just going way too early for draft choices. There's a group of guys. There's definitely a handful of guys I'd rather have more. I completely agree with you on that one. And speaking of offenses, and a very explosive offense, Tampa Bay, I have Mike Evans. Right now, he's going as a wide receiver 8. He's 28 years old. 19th. The Tampa Bay was 19th in points. He's ranked 19th, 3rd in points last year for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They scored a ton, as you know. 4th in attempts, passing attempts, 1st in yards, 3rd in touchdowns, and then they were 1st in interceptions. But that was Jameis Winston. Tom Brady, as we both know, is not going to be throwing interceptions. And I don't know if he's going to throw as many touchdowns as Jameis Winston does. I think that'll come back a little bit. But these are the reasons why I think Mike Evans is sort of overdrafted. Number one, he has a lot of offense going with him. Godwin and Gronkowski now, and the fact that Tom Brady, even though he has shown that he can throw the deep ball and be successful with that, he still is 40-something years old. And then this is probably last year, if not the last year with Tom Brady. So who's going to be their quarterback going into the future? We don't know. So I see Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski splitting the volume. And then on top of that, we don't really know who the quarterback is going to be next year, or in a couple of years, or even if Mike Evans is going to be on the team. And don't forget that Mike Evans drops the ball like no other. I mean, he's one of the leading receivers in drop passes. So I'd rather go with someone like Robert Woods or Curtis Kupp, or even those kind of guys over him. What do you think of Mike Evans? Do you think he's overly drafted, or is he, going to be the stud that he's been for his whole career?
Well, if you're drafting him as, if you're drafting him as a wide receiver 1, you want him to be that go-to guy. And I just don't see him consistently being that type of player in Tampa Bay's offense, because Tom Brady likes throwing the ball to his backs. He likes throwing the ball to his tight ends. And they have 3 tight ends there who are all pretty good. And then he likes throwing the ball to his slot receivers. And he doesn't throw a lot of long passes at this stage of the game. And so while Evans could have a few really good games, if you're expecting that on a consistent basis, I don't see it. I see him as more of a wide receiver 2 and not a wide receiver 1 in fantasy leagues.
Yeah, and he's going to be gone before you draft him as a wide receiver, unless you draft him, with the 14th and 15th pick, or if you have those picks, or some crazy amount of number, or you're the 4th pick and you draft Michael Thomas, and then you swing around, you get Mike Evans with your 15th pick. But for the most part, for the most leagues, Mike Evans is not going to be drafted as a wide receiver 2. He's going to be drafted as a wide receiver 1.
Yep. No doubt.
And that concludes our wide receivers. and let's move to our last position in tight ends. Keeping with the Tampa Bay theme here, we have Rob Gronkowski, and again, high passing offense, top 5 in almost all numbers. What do we see as far as Gronkowski and him being overly drafted? I know name probably has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, to me, I see a lot of similarities between Odell Beckham and Rob Gronkowski in that they're household names. People want to emulate them. They wear their jerseys. They're popular guys. They're visible. They're out there. They're vocal. Yeah, they're superstars. But Rob Gronkowski is now 31 years old, and he's an old 31 years old. And if you take a look at his laundry list of injuries, I mean, you name the body part, he's had some type of issue with it, back, ankle, arm, knee, hamstring, lung, groin. I mean, you name it, he's had it. And so for him now, for you to expect him to, come back off a year off and play 16 games and be the Gronk of old, I think that is insane. I think that, what's telling about Gronkowski and the fact that he's just, to me, he's being overdrafted. What's telling is that prior to the 2018 season, his last year playing with the New England Patriots, the Patriots actually tried trading him to the Detroit Lions. And it's only because Gronkowski vetoed the trade that he didn't end up going there. So to me, that is very revealing. It tells me that Bill Belichick already knew that, Gronkowski just wasn't the same player he used to be. And we saw during, long stretches of 2018 that he just wasn't as fast, or wasn't as quick as he used to be. He wasn't as effective at coming down with those contested catches as he was, during his heyday. And so now fast forwarding to 2020, I mean, if you're anticipating him to play more than 10 games, I think that you're in for a rude awakening. I just think that he's the type of player who, of course, he's got great chemistry with Tom Brady, but I think they're going to be looking ahead with him, and hopefully he'll be healthy enough to play during the playoffs. And I think it'll be in those games where he could be a real difference maker. But on a week-to-week basis, I don't know. I mean, there's a reason why they still have Cameron Brate. There's a reason why O.J. Howard is still on the team. They're protecting themselves because Bruce Arians probably knows he's not going to get 15, 16, or even 14 games out of Rob Gronkowski. And, looking at where he's being drafted, in a lot of leagues, he's the 6th tight end off the board, and he's going before Hayden Hurst, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, all younger, more athletic tight ends that I would rather have on my fantasy team. And so I just think that Gronkowski is being way overdrafted. And, a lot of people still seem to think that this is the same player from 2015. And he's just not. He's far from that.
Yeah. His last year in 2018, as you mentioned it, he looked more like a guy needing to retire than looking like Rob Gronkowski. And rightfully so, he did retire. I think this is one of those last heydays, and I think probably Tom Brady had a lot to do with saying, hey, let's just do this one more time. I don't see Gronkowski being more than 2 years. I'd be really surprised if it's only one. Especially with Tom Brady too. I don't see these guys more than 2 years. I see more of one. And when you're in a dynasty league and you're drafting your first tight end off the board, you don't really want to draft a tight end that is A, limited by other tight ends, B, has really maybe no quarterback come next year, C, can retire after 1 year. I mean, it is a dynasty league. You kind of want these guys for at least 3 years. So I think all those factors combined, and then like you mentioned, I think a lot of it has to do with Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, and they want to relive those glory days.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe he steps up, and maybe he has one or two magical games in the postseason if Tampa Bay even makes it that far. But he's not going to be reliable, and he's going to break down at some point.
Definitely. Yeah, I don't see him playing. And again, I don't see him being on the field like he was with New England. I as you mentioned with O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate, those guys will take over and take a lot of chunk out of his volume and his playing time because you just can't do it. So it's something that I totally not even on my draft board. As far as the next guy, I'm kind of surprised because I really like him. And the New York Giants, 18th in points last year, ninth in passing attempts, 18th in yards, and 5th in touchdowns. I was actually kind of surprised by how many touchdowns they actually threw as a team. But anyways, we're going with Evan Engram. Tell me why you don't like him. I'm guessing it's injuries, but if you have more than that, I'd love to hear it.
Well, it's injuries and it's production. So if we're looking at the 2019 season, he missed half the year with a bunch of knee and foot injuries, lower body injuries. And then, over the course of his career, now he's been around for about 4 years, I would say,
right.
3 or 4 years. He's averaged 4 touchdowns per year. And so, I mean, let's remember where this player was drafted. He was a first-round pick, 23rd overall. And I don't know. I'm still waiting for the superstar to emerge here, and I'm looking at a player who shows me flashes every 3 or 4 weeks or whenever he's on the field, but I don't see that superstar player. Now he's being picked in some leagues. He's being picked 7th overall, and look, I love this guy coming out of Ole Miss. He's a big wide receiver. He is explosive. I believe he has 4.4 speed or very close to it coming out of college. But, you didn't mention the injuries. Going back to his days in the SEC, this guy has missed games 7 years running now. And if you can't stay on the field and if that production is not there, I don't know. Is he versatile? When we did our tight end show, we talked about the importance of versatility. Well, Evan Engram is about 235 pounds, give or take. And if you try to line him up as a traditional tight end, or you try lining him up as an H-back, he's going to get broken in two. And so to me, he's one-dimensional, and he just hasn't shown me the production that I want to see out of him. I've seen other players who were drafted after him, even in the same draft, that are more productive. And I don't know. I mean, I know he's young, and he's got a new coach, and he's got a young, promising quarterback, but I just don't see him staying on the field. And I see better weapons in that offense, and I'd rather not take him as my number one tight end.
I do hear you. I think this is my point. I think that there's 5 tight ends in this league right now that you can count on as top 5 production, and Evan Engram to me is like that 5th tight end. After him, then you can have anybody, and we don't know what they're going to finish as. And so to me, that's why I like him. I think that as long as he's going as a tight end 5, I wouldn't take him any earlier than a tight end 5. And then of course later it gets in the draft, the more I'm going to be excited by him. But his production on the field, when on the field, is what I like. It just depends. And then also on top of that, you're looking at a team that doesn't really have a number 1 wide receiver. I mean, who are the receivers? They're all sort of, Golden Tate and Darius Slayton, and I forget the other guy off the top of my head, Shepard. And so it's just who are, these are all number 2 guys. These are all wide receiver 2 and 3 guys. And Engram is probably the best receiver, maybe the best receiver on the team. So I like him as a tight end 5. And after that, then, throw your hands in the air, because as you mentioned, someone like Jonnu Smith, who's saying Jonnu Smith can't be. I mean, if Engram plays 5 games and he's out for the rest of the year, you're going to get someone to argue that Jonnu Smith isn't going to be that tight end 5. Why not? I mean, I think
What about somebody like a Hayden Hurst? A guy with ability, and now is getting his chance to be the man in Atlanta's offense. One of the offenses that throws the ball constantly. I think the Falcons, averaged more passes per game than any other team in the NFL. So you're talking about somebody stepping into a great opportunity.
Yep.
I mean, Hayden Hurst can be that guy, that tight end 5 that you mentioned.
Yeah, and that the Atlanta looks for their tight end in the red zone and in the end zone. Those are where the tight ends shine. That's where Austin Hooper shined. And he's going to get probably 55, 60 receptions. So I think if you're looking at draft value, am I going to be upset that I don't get Evan Engram? No. I could care less if I get Evan Engram or not. Because of those guys as you're talking about, Hayden Hurst, Jonnu Smith, those guys, I can wait till 17th round, 15th round, whatever, and grab them and get a running back or a wide receiver in where I would have to pick an Evan Engram.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I mean, look, the upside is there with him. He's young. He's got his whole career in front of him. You would have to think one of these years he's going to put it all together and give you a 16-game season. But from what I've seen, I just I don't know if I'm ever going to get that out of him.
It might be like Tyler Eifert, take him 8 years to finally play all 16 games, but by then he's so debilitated that it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, but Eifert, even Eifert had that 1 year where he had 13 touchdowns. So let's see Engram, man. Even if you play 13 games, let's see 10 touchdowns out of you. Let's see. I haven't seen it so far.
Yeah, and you have a good point. And Daniel Jones, who knows? We really don't know what he's capable of either. So, yeah, those are very good points. Okay, Ralph, thank you for joining me once again. I love doing this show with you. You could find Ralph at Ralph Mancini, Reverend Ralph on Twitter. Find me, RFL Red Zone. I know you got a lot of stuff to do, so thank you for joining me. Everybody hit like, subscribe, spread the word, because that's how we get this thing going. That's how we grow this channel. So much appreciated for everybody viewing. And Ralph, take care. Have a great week, bud.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.